it's live. It's getting ready to stream there. And then, like I said, thanks for hanging tight, everybody. Um, live. It's getting ready to stream there. And then, like I said, okay, it's live. I just saw it on the wonderful. Okay, so if you are on YouTube, now you're just joining us. We are doing a live webinar slash podcast with my special guest, Troy Aberle, today. And thank you all for joining us. I'm going to get right down to it. I'm going to give you a formal introduction and then normally, this is how I start my podcast, so I'm going to start it just like that. Welcome to Resiliency Radio, your go-to podcast for cutting-edge insights in integrative and functional medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Jill, and with each episode, we dive into the heart of personal healing and transformation. Join us as we connect with renowned experts, thought leaders, and innovators. And tonight, we're doing a special webinar slash live episode. So we have audience attendees both on YouTube and in the queue here. And you guys are welcome as long as you're not driving. If you have your hands available, please, please, we want this interactive and we can talk all night long, but we want to answer your questions. We want it to be inspirational and valuable for you, whether you are on YouTube or you are on here on the webinar. So pop in, say hello if you like, tell us where you're from, and feel free to type in your questions in the chat and we will get that enabled. And when I see the chat is disabled, so let me make sure that that is, thank you for letting me know. Let's get that. Okay, so it looks like we can now. Okay, I can see you, Anne Marie, in the chat, so I think the Q&A is working. So hopefully if you guys go into Q&A, it's enabled now. You can ask your questions. Okay, so now let me introduce my guest. My guest, Troy Aberle, is an executive strategist at Chet Holmes International, a global consulting firm that helps businesses grow faster and smarter. But he's also leveraged his 25 years of experience operating as a team leader in so many different industries and his certification as a Bob Proctor consultant to empower clients to achieve goals and dreams. He is passionate about helping people transform lives and businesses with the most efficient, profitable, and impactful strategies. Today, though, it's just Jill and Troy. We're just talking real life and real stories and real impact. So even though we could talk business all day long tonight, I want it to be very practical. And Troy, thank you for joining us. Let me let you get a word in and welcome to the show.
No, you're fine. Thank you, Dr. Jill. It's an honor to be here and look forward to chatting and talking it through about what all the things that people would love to hear about, and hopefully we can create some inspiration.
Yeah, so again, thank you all for joining us, whether you're on YouTube or here on the webinar live. It is so fun always to be with a real audience, and I hope that you will feel comfortable anonymously or with your real name asking us questions and joining in comments. Anything is open here. It is, we're open books, as we said. So the big news is, if you haven't heard, I don't know where you've been hiding, but my documentary, Doctor Patient, is available now, streaming. You can watch it, you can rent it, you can gift it if it inspires you. And it's at drpatientmovie.com. I'm going to go ahead and just put that in the chat because that's kind of part of the foundation of our chat tonight is just sharing the movie with you and really hoping that will impact your lives. So I'm going to give just a little backstory about Troy and I. Interestingly, I think we both had a similar story, and Troy, I'll let you share your side in just a second. But there was a conference I was supposed to attend last June, and all of a sudden I got an invitation from another person who was doing a special event, and it was literally the same days, and I had to literally juggle everything in my, travel schedule to make this happen and shift to this other conference on longevity. And that's where I met Troy. And it was one of those things where so often in life, there's this deep intuition about something I'm supposed to do. And it was one of those times where like I was committed to another event, but I felt very clearly in like the week before this, I needed to shift and go to this other event. And I felt it wasn't like I was going to be able to share the documentary there and meet some people, but it was one of those times where like, I think there's somebody here I'm supposed to meet. I didn't know what, I didn't know how, but as so often in my life and with my faith, it's just going forward. There's a chapter in my book called Believe, Act, Wait, and it's believing for something special. And then you act, you do your part. I scheduled the travel. I said yes to the conference. And then you wait and see what happens. And what happened was I met some amazing people. But the person that really, really impacted my life and continues to be a friend is Troy Aberle. And Troy, you have a similar story of that conference. I'd love to hear from you about getting to that event and then us meeting there and
It's
watching
like
the
a year
documentary.
ago, like tomorrow.
Yeah.
And you think, well, yeah, so same thing for me was we're going to be going to another event after that. But then this gentleman had phoned and said, "Hey, would you like to come to this mastermind? And there's going to be some really great people there." Didn't know anything about it, but thought it just seemed like something I was supposed to do. So Amanda and I then planned, you know what, we're going to go to Orlando early. And then boom, it just all of a sudden everything started to happen. And it was really cool because then getting to meet you and then watching your movie and getting to see that sneak peek, I'm like, oh my gosh, like you're always wondering too, why are you in a room and you have no idea why? And then realizing the person who's got the same kind of story as me is standing here with a video, and it's like this other version of what it was that I have gone through, and so it was just such similarity, and it was just really cool to be able to meet you, and then be able to carry on a friendship, but also now to really feel heard, and get to teach people tonight what it's like to be heard and how to get that point across.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective, Troy, because I don't think I even knew until our mutual friend who invited us said, "Hey, did you talk to Troy about the movie?" So then I think we connected after. But I would love to, what I was going to try to do, guys, if you will bear with me, I know Zoom does not transmit video audio great, but if you're willing to try it with me, I'd love to try to share a 2-minute clip with you of, I think, one of the parts that impacted both of us, and then we could talk about that. So let's try this. And you guys are in the chat. So if it goes terribly wrong and you can't hear anything at all, we'll stop. We'll alter our plan. No big deal. But I'd love to be able to share a little clip of the movie that you haven't, if you haven't seen it. And if you guys are in the chat box, I would love to hear how many of you have actually seen the movie. And like I said, I put the link there if you want to check it out later. So let's try this. We're going to try to share a clip and we'll see how it goes. We'll just give it a try. Okay. So here we go. And I will turn up my audio so you guys can hear this. Oh, actually, this is the trailer. Hold on. We're going to try. We're going to try the actual movie. Uh, okay. And this is here. Okay. There we go. And so you can see a big tractor with corn in it, right, Troy?
Yeah, you betcha.
Okay. You got it. Okay. So we're going to watch 2 minutes here and we'll see how the sound goes through. Here we go. My eyes would swell shut. My skin was completely covered with rashes. I would itch all night long till I bled. I'd sneeze and sneeze and sneeze and sneeze, and then I'd fall asleep. When I think about my health as a child, the emotion that comes to mind is just guilt and shame. I felt so badly for being sick. Like that weakness somehow made me less valuable than my brothers because they could work. They didn't have any trouble. Looking back, it felt like it was my fault. Like there's something wrong with me that I couldn't work hard. I started thinking about possible causes to my cancer, especially at such a young age. One of the things that's common on the farms is pesticides and herbicides and organophosphates and chemicals, and some of them have endocrine disrupting effects on the human body. What this means is they act like hormones and contribute to hormone types of cancers like my breast cancer. My immune system and my detoxification system were not up to the challenge of decreasing the toxic load that I was exposed to. And I have no doubt that it contributed to me getting cancer at 25. Oh, it's hopefully now you guys all want to watch the whole thing. Troy, I picked that clip because what we talk about, and again, this goes back to story, which we'll go in a minute to why story is so important. but I picked that clip because it's a little piece of the puzzle as far as so many of us who have illness feel like something's wrong with us or that we can't perform or can't overcome. And there's this guilt and shame around illness sometimes. And it's even worse when you have some kind of illness. And I know many of you out there, some of you are patients, clients, whatever else, and either you or you yourself have an illness or you know someone who does. And especially something like mold-related illness or these chronic complex things, they're kind of invisible. And I'm sure that some of you can relate. Again, feel free to chat if you have any comments or things that you want to share. But the truth is, illness is universal to humanity. So we all suffer in some way. But being seen is really, really, really at the core and being feel like you understood, like in the illness. Troy, how did this affect you? You grew up on a farm. Tell us just a little bit about your childhood growing up and how there was some things in the movie that resonated deeply with you.
Well, so I didn't know which clip you were going to pick today. And for me, that was the spot because I grew up on a farm around a lot of moldy grains. I started to think about as when you were showing that, I didn't understand it. And so from I think around 14, 15 years old, I started getting quite a bit of digestion issues, hormonal issues, digestion. And then going into college, I didn't realize, people would always say, "Are you always sick? There's always something wrong with you." But you'd go to the doctor, and they would say, "Well, let's try this. Are you sure?" And my mom was a registered nurse, and the doctors finally started saying to her, "I think it's in his head. I think it's
Oh,
mental." And then I remember when I got my first exploratory surgery to find out why I was in so much pain. And the doctor who had accused me or had suggested that this was all in my head came in and he happened to notice me and he came in and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, I'm just laying here faking it."
mm,
And he just stood there, and I just remember then falling asleep and just feeling like it's such a relief that someone had finally listened to me. But going from years and years and years of saying there's something wrong with my stomach, there's something wrong with my hips, my muscles, and I had like alopecia and just different things going on where you're like, my body is reacting to something. And when
yeah,
I'm reading about it, I'm not making it up. My body's telling me, I feel like my intuition's good. I
yeah,
feel like I'm researching, but at the time people would say, "Well, you can't look at Dr. Google," or when you make this up in your head, it's, they come up with so many stories and it's hard for me to even describe. But I always wish that they would just stop for a minute and see it through my eyes. Why would a 17-year-old or a 19 or a 25-year-old, why would I spend so much time trying to make up something? But they didn't ever take time to really look at what was causing it, rather just try to mask it. But if somebody would have came to me and said, like that video did, and said, "Hey, maybe it's your environment, maybe it's the mold, maybe it's the dust, it's the diesel fuel that you get splashed on you, or grease, or herbicides, or pesticides. Well, maybe it's what you're breathing, or is it well water?" But taking a look at everything that's coming in at your body and finding out what is wrong, maybe we could have saved a lot of years of having a better quality of life. And so that's where, to me, there's a piece of my story that never got shared. That all of a sudden, listening to yours, I'm like, wait a second. I never thought that my environment was actually creating my story in such a way. And I never ever thought of it that way. No one ever asked me any of those questions. And here you are describing it all. And then I remember, though, when I did think that there was problems with grain dust, I remember thinking, well, I'm from a farm. Like, how dare I tell people that there's something wrong with the dust? And I never understood it.
so fascinating because there really is like the farm environment. There's this tough mentality, like it makes you a really hard worker. It's there's some things about farm family life that just you're in the elements, you have to survive, you're into some beautiful things that led to us being able to be in the world and be successful. But on that other side of it is there's, at least for me growing up, and I'd love to hear you, there was not a lot of um openness about sharing your feelings or like I'm hurting. Like obviously you went to the doctor when you were hurting, but it wasn't like there was not a lot of tenderness around that, right? Like buck up and, stop complaining. At least for me, it was. So there was this like really dichotomy. I think you and I happen to be very intuitive, sensitive people, and that's what makes us good in the worlds we're in. But as a child, it wasn't really okay to be
No.
super sensitive, right? Yeah, especially in those environments.
You're
Um,
supposed to toughen up, and it's I get why, maybe there is, that thing where everybody's been told as kids to be tough.
yeah,
But when people are, I think when you're chronically having problems, when you don't feel heard, now you add the mental and the physical combined. No one believes you.
yeah,
Now you start to doubt yourself. Now you
yes,
start to feel guilty because
yes.
everyone else is able to do this. And when someone says to you, well, we've been doing that for years, that sounds super cool, but I'm dealing with something, right? So,
Yeah. Now,
yeah.
I want to talk a bit about this. And I do want to make a side note. You were right, Anne Marie, the chat was disabled. It is now enabled. So I'm so sorry. You guys are probably like, Dr. Jill, we can't chat, but you can chat now if you want to comment in the chat, comment questions, anything. I don't care where you put them in the Q&A or the chat, but it's now enabled. Okay, so back to your point. This is so important. What you described was medical gaslighting. And now that term's real popular, but the truth is what that means is even it could be a 45-year-old woman, it could be a 17-year-old male, it could be anything in between. And you're like, something is not right in my body. Our bodies are created to give us signals when something's not right. A headache, stomach ache, something digestion is off. Maybe we feel really tired or exhausted. And it's clues to inside physiology, but also clues to our environment. Like for me with allergies, when I go out in those corn and soybeans, now, I used to, for years and years, talk about corn and soybean allergy. That was my thing. But now I actually believe it was mold on the crops that probably was the worst offender because we know those crops are so moldy. That's a side note. But this gaslighting, what happens is you yourself, whether you are 5 years old or you're 25 or you're 75, you know your body and you believe you get these signals. We are born with the ability to sense our bodies. But whether it's our parents saying, "Oh, buck up, be tough, you don't complain, don't show weakness," or and we both had great families. I'm not saying that we had parents at all because that's not the truth, but that
Oh,
farm mentality.
they did what they
Or yeah,
knew to
or,
do.
or you go to a doctor, and this is even worse because you trust this professional to give you information and to listen to your symptoms and to take you seriously. And instead of that, because they don't have the answer, their ego causes them to diminish your value of your somatic sensations of what's happening in your body and basically say, well, I've seen it a million times. A 45-year-old woman says, I'm really tired. I've been having headaches. Something's wrong. They look at the labs and they say, everything looks okay. It must be. Would you like an antidepressant? That's even more insulting, right?
Yes.
Like, granted, there's depression and there's a place for those meds. I have no problem with that. But to tell someone, oh, maybe you need an antidepressant because they have real physical symptoms. And again, maybe some of you in the chat can relate to this. Troy, how was it to actually see? I wonder if you've ever experienced, I mean, you and I have talked a lot on this level after you saw the movie, but had you ever had an experience where you really felt seen or heard?
Never, honestly. That's where when I fell in love with the word functional medicine doctor, because I'd started to realize that people only talk to you for 10 or 15 minutes, and it's not any of their fault. I mean, they'd love to, but just financially, you need to see so many patients at a certain income to be able to pay your bills, right? And I'm from Canada, and I think it's the same across Canada and the US. But where people, I think that's the thing, is trying to find a quick fix, but never looking at the source. So you keep trying to add things. And then, yes, I got my first prescription of Paxil and I didn't even know what it was. And then I'm start
Um,
looking at it, I'm like, well, okay, so I guess I'm a little bit anxious. I get it, but I'd like to be healthy. I don't know if that's anxious or just, really wanting to be
Huh.
different and healthy. But maybe it is in my head. You start telling yourself, and then you start. I think you start lowering your frequency or your temperature because you're trying to adapt to what people are saying because you don't know any different. But no, to answer your question, Dr. Jill, no, I don't. I think no one intends to not hear you. It's just that they don't
Yeah.
realize that you don't feel like you've been heard.
And well, here we are hitting the heart of, I think we can pull this together with a story because number one, when you're in a physician office or any medical provider, to be seen and to be heard is the start of healing. Like
Yes.
I know that beyond a shadow of a doubt that my most important job, especially on that first visit, is to listen and to create a safe space for that person to completely share their story. And again, this story is so powerful because the moment the healing starts is when that patient in front of me can start to share their story and I can listen and not interrupt, maybe ask some questions to clarify, but just listen and listen. And I have had hundreds of patients sit there and share their story and either tell me, no one's ever listened to my story. No one's ever validated and made me feel like I'm actually worthy of being heard. No one's ever said, asked questions about my symptoms. They said, oh, well, that can't be true. They've invalidated me. And these things like this is really the start of healing. And it's funny because there was this acronym with the movie BLT. It was believe in yourself. And that's part of that connection to our bodies, sensory signals. But when we get told over and over again, especially 17, 24, that those signals aren't valid, we start to invalidate our own selves and we start to dissociate. I would say I lived from the neck up for many years because I was like in my head and I was like, shut up, body, stop giving me these signals. I don't know what to do with them. But it's actually part of the healing is reconnecting and listening and trusting. So that B is believe in yourself. T is trust your intuition, trust your body, trust your signals. And the L is love, love yourself enough to be honest and love others in that process. And it's so much. I love that you got that out of the movie because that really is the heart of healing.
It's interesting that you say that this way. Like one of my first mentors that I became a coach through was Tony Robbins. And Tony taught us when you teach, or when you respond to someone, I know how you feel, others have felt the same, and what we found, so it's feel, felt, found. But when you do that, people automatically, the level of rapport and engagement just increases significantly. I never thought of that till right now, is when you do share that, and where, what you had said that to me when we were talking on my first intake call with you, and I started to understand, as you had said, tell me your story. And we'd started off when I was, a young man or a young boy, all the way up till now. Then you start going through there, and success leaves clues, right? So if we can look at those clues all along the way of what worked and what didn't work, we start to get a thing. And I think it's funny because there were so many clues along the way that I don't think people really listen to. And so it's been an interesting thing. But when someone finally says, "I get you,"
Yeah.
yes, your shoulders drop, your breathing changes, and
Oh.
you just feel something totally different. It's magical.
Wow, I love hearing that from the other side because I get excited on my side. Like I'm listening to these clues. I'm like, tell me more about that. And then I might break into a little explanation. Well, I think that could be related to this thing. And then maybe this thing could develop from this thing. And I get excited because I'm like solving a puzzle and I'm engaging in that. But I think what that does then is validate the patient to tell more. And they're like, oh, and it's so funny because you know how many times I've heard, well, this may not be relevant, but. And it might be
Right.
the most important thing they tell me. So like everything's relevant. If you're out there talking to your doctor, this, and you first of all find a doctor who will listen, a mid-level, a doctor, a provider of whatever sort that you need, but find someone who actually takes you seriously. That's the most important first step. And then second step is share those things that you might think are inconsequential because they matter. I often have patients do a timeline. So literally write out, birth till up till today and write out significant events. And everything matters. Your parents got a divorce and it was hard and you felt like stuck between two worlds, or XYZ, or you had a car accident, had a concussion at 17 and no one ever did anything about it. All these little clues for me are big clues in the whole trajectory of your illness. Um, it's interesting, Troy, you mentioned being heard and I'm resonating with the movie. There's one story in the movie of a patient, Burke, and Burke
Hmm.
talks about at 16 with these severe ulcerations and going from hospital to hospital, hospital until his 30s when he finally got to my office and literally kind of starting to just believe that no one would ever help him. And I think that's a powerful story too, and so similar.
Yeah, I think if you can take that few extra moments as a physician and just stop for a second and listen to your own self, are you cutting the patient off and coming up with a quick answer? Or have you heard the things in behind what they're telling you so you get just that little bit deeper, peel that layers of the onion back? If you have a way you can do that, you're going to get that much deeper and it's going to have that much more clues to what it is, excuse me, that you're going through or that you're trying to uncover from that patient, and you will get deeper into it. I think that's the hardest part, is when you feel like you've left and you never felt like you've been heard. You take the prescription or whatever it is you're supposed to do the test, and it just feels like you've been processed, but you haven't been heard.
Yeah. Oh, so true. And one thing you mentioned earlier in your Tony Robbins, the correlation so powerful because he talks about just giving someone that basically telling them that I hear you, I see you. It's so interesting to me because in medical training, this is literally trained out of even the most empathetic. So it's no wonder your doctor doesn't show empathy sometimes because medical training is still so brutal. We are taught to remain objective, to be all about the science, which I love science. I'm all about the science, but you can have coexistence of science and intuition. And there have been literally scientific studies that show the power of our intuition. I always compare it like science and analytical mind is ability, it's like the old analog computer where it can process thousands of pieces of data in a few minutes or an hour or two. Our intuition, however, and I'd love to hear your comments on this because I know you and your work, have a much bigger view of energy, intuition, and this on business too. But for medicine, we're taught to ignore that intuition. But the truth is that intuition takes experience over time and is a phenomenally powerful calculator of pattern recognition. So what it does is it looks at patterns over time and it's in our subconscious. So we're not even aware of it, but that subconscious is so it's like a supercomputer that we have that we take our life experience and our scientific knowledge. And then if we're listening and we're really present with a person, our intuition can lead us to the right answer in milliseconds. And then I always prove it with the science. So I use both. I don't like say no science and all intuition. I don't say all science and no intuition. But what I've found, and what I think doctors maybe who have been conventionally trained and not realize is they're afraid of that intuition. Like it's not powerful or it's not accurate, but the opposite is true. I have found as I sit with patients and really listen, I often have a sense of where to go, and it's an intuitive sense and it's instantaneous. And then, of course, I prove with the science, but those things you want a healer in your life to have that ability to be empathetic and intuitive. And like I said, the sad thing is most doctors in the training have been told, don't cry with the patient, don't share your personal story, God forbid you ever trust your intuition, right? And those things are just not true in nowadays medicine. Troy, what's your comments from business perspective and a patient perspective on the power of science and intuition and blending those?
Well, I think blending them because you are going to have people that are very analytical. You're going to have people that are energetic, if you will. Um, I think that there's a piece missing when we don't do this, especially when you could be, as a physician, earning more revenue per patient because you've spent more time with them. And what'll happen is not only time, but you can add other products and services to them because you could facilitate more investigation, more treatment, things deeper. I feel like so many times because we don't get the whole story, we go off to other specialists or do different things. But maybe there's a few more things that if we uncovered it, we could get answers quicker, get results of bringing things like what you've done for me is being able to get the symptoms changed, but then also graduate them then through a program where they're part of something really magical. Now you're helping maintain healthy people rather than just focused on fixing sick people.
Ah, so powerful. And thank you so much for sharing your personal story because it's relevant on so many levels as you and I as farm kids and
Yeah.
like this medical gaslighting that happened as a child. And in some ways I had the same because it's like, oh, don't complain. I remember like there's this photo of me in the field and I'm like rubbing my eyes and like crying like in this horrible face. Everybody else is just happy walking the beans. That's what we did as children in the farm is like pull weeds from the beans. It was called walking the beans. And I remember so well, like my hips would hurt, my body would hurt. I'd be sneezing. I was so miserable. And it was almost like kind of what you said there is I negated my own experience. And if I look back, I was like, it was horrible, very painful and very, but I just thought, oh, I'm making a big deal about this. This must not be that bad. Like everybody else is fine, right? I'm not fine. And so we kind of like shift our perception of reality to fit what people think we should do or be or with our illness. And having someone empathetic listening is transforming that pain and suffering that was never seen or heard into something that is actually a powerful healer.
It's amazing because as I started listening and thinking, because I'd go to the doctor. By the way, I worked at John Deere for 13 years on top of
Uh-huh.
being a farmer.
Wow.
But what's interesting is at harvest time, lentils are typically the first thing in our region that's
Mhm.
harvested first, and lentils are supposedly a healthy product according to the way that we were raised. But yet lentils, when I would breathe in any of the dust from the harvesting piece of equipment, like what we saw on your video, that dust, I would get not so much always itchy. I'd get itchy, yes. People would say, well, that's barley. But even as I talk about it, I start getting itchy.
Yeah.
And and what would happen is I would become almost confused. It's like my mind, it was like I felt slightly intoxicated. And I would get really messed up from it. I'd have a harder time breathing. Night times would be horrible. Sleeping would be bad. And migraines would be really bad.
Wow.
And here everybody else is like, oh, Troy, what are you going to do? Wear a mask? And I'm like, I don't know, but I just get really sick when I'm around lentil dust. And so you think about this and you put that into play, and the doctors would say, well, I don't know what would cause that. And then you ask, well, can I get an allergy test or can we figure out? Never thought of the word mold, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
We just thought mold is everywhere. I mean, you eat mushrooms and isn't that
Right.
mold? And you're trying to figure out, you know what I mean? You don't know. But I will say this is me sharing my story in that way, then and talking it through. Then you say, well, actually, Troy, you live in the forest as well, drinking well water. So there's even spots where you can get mold there. And you start to think about it. Wow, isn't that interesting? You can actually start to figure out mold if it's already at that bit high of a level and you're adding more, you're going to have another reaction. So rather than just taking pills like antihistamines and things like that, maybe we should look at what's going on inside your body. And it's like, wow, and I stand here today with haven't taken Nexium or what do you call it, Rolaids and Gaviscons and all that stuff in quite a long time now. But that's because of the story I got to share
Yeah.
and that you actually listened to. And so that's why it's so powerful. And that video then was what caught my attention. If someone would just hear me say this, right?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, thanks so much for sharing. And it is so relevant. I see people commenting in. This is a perfect transition because Rivka has just said, I got breast cancer at 25 too. I have an interesting story. First of all, Rivka, I'm sorry. I hope you are doing well and thriving. But this is a good transition because one of the things we want to talk about today was story. And I don't want it, you and I could do business story all day long, marketing. That's your expertise, and you're so good at it. I'm so honored to be here with you. But we wanted to talk today about, I don't care if you are a 17-year-old teenage kid or you are someone who's, out in nature, meditating, writing a book, or you're a CEO. I don't care where you're at. I feel so strongly that your story matters because when you share your story, and I don't know why it is in our world, but sometimes that vulnerability of really sharing on a deep level can be intimidating. Troy, you're an expert in this because this is really what marketing is about, except I don't want it to be so much about that. I want it to be about the human element of story and connection. Tell us, why does story matter? Why does every person who's listening story matter? And how can people kind of use that to really engage in the world and pursue their passion and purpose?
Hmm. So I would say, so story, by the way, like Chet Holmes, when I learned that from Chet, the power of story is so important because that's how people actually think is in story. It's how they relate to things is in story. It's why we find it fascinating to watch stories on movies. It's just the format that people really do pay attention and communicate with. I think what's really interesting then, like we teach this at Chet Holmes International, but is when you can tie story and data together because then it makes it really the way that you can prove things. And so, for instance, if you're trying to reach out to somebody and talk, I call it a punch in the gut statement. But when you say, who here is ready to get, um, lose all their relationships because of a sore tummy ache? Well, everybody's going to pay attention because you can say, well, guess what? 63% or whatever that number is of people who have bleeding ulcers also don't spend any time with their friends, family, loved ones,
Wow.
right? They sit at home, right? So if you're using statistics and story, now you're showing that, and we do that with so many different products. I think story is just, it's always, rather than just telling people what they need to hear, is turn it into a story so that they can relate to you and build rapport. Back that up with some data and proof to show that you're an expert in the field
Mhm.
at the end story. But for all the doctors, and including yourself, Dr. Jill, the more stories that you take time to learn at from people, now you can share the stories and borrow a story from Troy. Now you can talk to people about me because you've heard mine, and you can say, "Well, I met this amazing guy that had this." I got to give myself a little bit there, but
Yes.
but this amazing guy who actually grew up on a farm and didn't realize that he had a problem with mold.
Yeah.
And you can walk them through this entire thing where it triggers and they're like, hey, wait a second. I can relate to him. Lentils do bother me,
Yeah.
right? Or barley or what have you. Um, Troy also talked about shoveling rotten grain when they cleaned out bins in grain storage to get ready for the next year. If they had a leak, they didn't wear a mask. They didn't do those things, right? Maybe it's somebody who's been in the forest or someone who worked at a mushroom farm or it's
Yeah.
somebody that's got a mold, black mold in their house, right? But when you can talk to people about those stories and you can share what the emotions were behind those stories,
Mm.
that's when it triggers because it's the emotional, I call it punch in the gut.
Yeah.
But when you go through a divorce or you're going through domestic type relationship problems because of health challenges, now people can feel that it's been said by you as a physician or someone, and they can relate to it now. They aren't the first person. Now they'll say, you know what, I've actually been going through that too. My wife can't stand being around me when I'm not doing well,
Yeah.
right? My husband or my children
Yeah.
feel like I'm not as important anymore when I can't come and play ball because my hips hurt and my gout is inflamed, right? There's so many of those things. And when you can share that story and that emotion and get real raw with people, talk about the emotion versus the symptom, but
Yeah.
talk about the emotion that they're feeling, and that story is going to gravitate much more.
Wow. Like I felt shame as a child when I couldn't work as hard as my, so it's interesting because it's funny too, because just, I'm going to go back from just a second perspective of making the documentary. And as, telling my story on camera, I'll just tell you, if any of you have watched any of our other webinars, you might have heard this and Dan and Aaron and I talked, but the truth is, in the first version of this, it wasn't nearly as raw emotionally as this version, but we all together decided, you know what? We want people viewing the documentary to see themselves in the story in some part and see that there's hope in that. And the only way that connection happens is what you just described is the sharing of emotion, because we can feel, if you have any empathy at all, you can feel on the screen my sadness and overwhelm and fear and shame and guilt. And then you're like, oh, I remember when I felt that way too, and maybe another situation, but we can all relate to human emotions and we all have them. But going back to the drawing board on the version that is now out in public was um, it has a lot more of what I call ugly cry scenes. And it was just really raw. But what I found is it's those parts that actually resonate the most deeply with the viewer because those are the parts where I am the most real and vulnerable. And I think a story I remember years ago when I talked about breast cancer and Crohn's disease and overcoming that, and I would tell physicians and teach them and be like, I overcame this and I healed from this, and then now everything's great. And shortened, right? That's not the truth. And when I started actually sharing, yeah, I overcame that, but still today I'm struggling with this in the journey, it's actually a lot more authentic than just pretending like we have it all together, which none of us do. So that's what we did with the movie as well, is kind of go back to that, really sharing deeply about pain and suffering and how we overcame stuff, but also how it's real. And I think it just resonates with people.
Yeah, if I could touch on one more piece. So, as if you're a physician on this call and watching, thank you for being here. But take a look at the types of clients that you work with the most or the ones that you're inspired by the most to help. What'll happen is you can then start to take pieces of their story and put some statistics on it because people almost need permission to be
Mhm.
vulnerable, right?
Yes.
So if we looked at, 25-year-old women who have breast cancer and giving them some story and then also some statistics behind, um, people who've, been able to do this, this, and this, it gives them a different hope. It gives them permission to be able to talk about it because now they feel like they're part of something that's already being talking about and they feel like there's this openness. Men are the same way, and you're going to find different groups of people that the more and more you share these stories with ahead of time, it encourages them to bring out more things, and you can then get more clues that you could then diagnose after. Then, as that happens, the mental relief that will happen will not only affect that patient and the ability to do your job really well, but think of all of the people that those people are going to go home to with a very different outlook because they felt heard and now they're not waiting for someone else to hear them because you can only expect that so many times when you go home and at some point it gets hard, right? And so if we can do that, you have the opportunity just by listening to their story and then teaching them about other people's stories and putting that into one thing, you have the ability to impact so many more layers of people after. It's so powerful.
Yes, so true. I love that you bring that perspective. I think one of the thing is of the people listening out there, they might be like, well, I'm not an author, I don't have a podcast or whatever things. But the truth is, it might be in your community. I've seen patients that, go to the grocery store and they see someone that's maybe with a cane and they just start talking and find out, oh my gosh, you had this surgery. And so it's like in our communities, we can share story. And sometimes that's just as powerful. But I also want to say, if you're out there and someone, Rivka, you said you have a story, maybe you have a book in you. And, any of us can be authors. And you might have, I found in my book, the easiest way to write was actually to dictate. So I would go on walks and I'd dictate stories and then I'd edit it. So you don't have to be a writer. You could just, and again, I just want to encourage you out there because I don't know all of you who are listening tonight, and who will be listening to this recording. I don't know your talents or skills or what you love to do, but you all have a platform, whether it's your community, your business, your family, to tell your story. And it matters. And it matters because some of our families are very stoic, like again, talking about myself here. And there wasn't growing up. Now my family's been way more open about these kinds of things, but growing up, you kind of pretend like you have things mostly together in that community. And you don't really share deeply sometimes about like how much you suffer. I remember thinking like every marriage in my community growing up was perfect because no one talked about that, right? And there wasn't a lot of divorce. But then later I'm like, oh yeah, they were like any other humans. There was people who were struggling. They just didn't talk about it. But then it made me think as a child that everybody was perfect. And then that's not authentic at all, right? So I learned, I'm like, no, 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 we actually want to share these things that we're struggling with because it's common to humanity. We're not unique. So I guess the bottom line here is I want to say you guys who are listening have a story, and whether it's a book, whether it's sharing with a family member or in your community, it matters, and your story matters.
I love that. I think, even like I liked what you talked about with dictating because you can dictate to your phone
Mhm.
and you can transcribe that. You could make a research article that you could, or if you will, it doesn't have to be research, sorry, but an article where it's just like, hey, would you like to know what I went through in the last 20 years?
Yeah,
These were the things that made me laugh, smile, cry, upset. And I think that when you share that and you can share that openly and ask other people for their stories, give them a little bit
yeah.
and start sharing with each other, it can be so powerful. So it's not just the doctor's office, but it's also with your family, your friends, most importantly, yourself. Look at the journey of what you have gone through, good or bad. It may have opened up other doors to awaken you to.
Yeah. Well, and I love thinking about there's a line in the trailer about how suffering is the times in our deepest, darkest moments are where we often find resilience we didn't know we had, where we find the power to transform personally or the catalyst to get us out of a stuck position. And so there's a piece of difficulty and suffering that if we have a lens of viewing it as a catalyst for transformation in our lives, in our relationships, in our work, if you guys listening, I bet some of you could share, but I bet you if you think back to some of the most difficult times in your life, and you now from a 5, 10, 20-year perspective look back, I bet many of you could say, you know what? That was so hard, but it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And it was because it shook you out of a pattern of thinking, it shook you out of a pattern of being, it shook you out of an identity, and it transformed you. And when we view suffering and difficulties as transformative processes that are for us and not to us or at us or happening, it's really kind of exciting. I'm finally at the point in my life where I've had so many crazy experiences, breast cancer, Crohn's disease, mold-related illness, divorce, toxic relationships, that now I'm kind of
Oh,
like, okay,
goodness.
bring it on. I'm ready. I'm like, not that I love suffering, I don't, but I know that in that I will always find meaning and purpose. And when you find that, and I go from my mentors, I'm sure you've read Viktor Frankl and some of these amazing heroic stories like Man's Search for Meaning, Edith Eger in The Gift. And these
Mhm.
are Holocaust survivors. So I always feel like I can't compare, not even remotely compared to their suffering. But what they do, each one of them, they take that deepest, darkest times and transform. And it really shows the power of the human spirit. And it's inspiring to people like me.
You made me think of something. It's like I want to ask people from now on. I think I'm going to challenge myself is what could I ask people? Have you felt heard today from what, right? It's just, do you feel like there's anything else that you need to get off your chest or do you feel like I've heard and really understood where you are and just be that much more open? I'm just reading Anne Marie's part about her songs, and I think that's really beautiful. And the lime, the mold, yeah, like wow. I mean, that's really powerful.
And Anne Marie, I know and love you, and so you that I love that you're writing music. It touches my heart so deeply because that music is going to be the story that you tell someone else that inspires them and encourages them. And one of the things that you're probably finding out, Troy, I know you can relate, I know I can relate, so often in the telling of the story or the writing of the story, that's part of our therapeutic healing. Because when we actually go through it in our minds or write it out, all of a sudden, for me writing the book and doing the movie, there was a lot of clarity that happened in writing and telling the story. And I was like, oh, even that chapter on believe, act, wait, it was this pattern of thinking where I believed for some miracle and then I acted with what was in my power and then I waited for the rest of it to happen from the divine. And that story over and over came through my life, but I didn't know it. I wouldn't have told you believe, act, wait was a mantra I used until I started writing and seeing over and over and over again in my life that happened. And so it's in the telling, the writing of the song, the telling of the story that often you're going to see more clarity in your own life and what really happens.
Something that's very interesting, as Anne Marie was talking about that, a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to write a song with the one of the songwriters for Keith Urban, and he said him and his partner they told us in Nashville, they said, "Don't tell me what you want me to hear, show me." And so when you're talking about story and what it is that you're feeling, and if you can put that into a way of showing someone and giving that back to them. To answer your question again about uh, the power of story, is because then people can visualize that they're okay, that their story is okay to also be reflected on and inquired about, and then they can start to talk about their journey and how they got there. Now we can give them a chapter where there's some healing involved, but the most important chapter is to be heard. So if
Yeah.
you can encourage them to share that story and tell you and show you what it is that they've been going through, I think that's really powerful. And I think even as people in their personal relationships, in their marriages, or with their children, stop for a moment and just ask someone to explain to you what it is that they're feeling because of something, and to explain and show you what's going on with them when they say something isn't right. Explain it deeper,
Yeah.
right? And just I think there's a piece to that, and show me. So
Wow.
yeah,
And I love because here we are talking about telling your story, which is important. But what you're saying, Troy, is what if we ask people, tell me your story? Like whether it's coffee with a friend or whether it's a business person. And it could be people we've known for decades. And we might go back and say, you know what? Tell me about your childhood growing up. Tell me more. Tell me something that you've never told me before. And these kinds of questions, I think, whether it's friends or business relationships or family members or loved ones, they deepen that because everyone wants to feel seen and heard. And even people we've known for the years and years and decades, even our children, right? Like, I think this is a great practice with our children. Tell me your story. What have you been experiencing lately? What's impacting you in your life right now? What's your pain points? What's your, um, any thoughts on that, on how we can connect deeper with our relationships just through story?
I think if you can get to the other side of the desk and sit beside someone and see it from their side of the desk,
Yeah.
if it's a child, I look at my sons, I sit down on a smaller chair because I just want to hear it from their point of view. I don't want to look down. I don't want to look up. I want to be at the same level. And then I want to repeat back to them everything I've heard so that they feel like I've heard them, because that's very powerful, right? A friend, Chris Voss, he's a FBI negotiator, and he said, when you're repeating back things and you're giving people understanding, they feel like they're heard, they feel like they're connected, and even in the most vulnerable positions, as something that he would have worked on, people then feel like you are very well connected to them, and you're on that same frequency, if you will. And I think that that's a really important piece, is getting to that same frequency, getting the same level, so that no one feels intimidated, but they feel like they have a friend. And
Yeah.
you asking deeper questions pulls that out.
Ooh, I love that. And Troy, just because you're such a master at this, what would be some like really practical? So say I say this, is there like some verbiage that you would say, so I hear you saying, or is there anything you can give people practically? Because I think that's super powerful. And sometimes the real like whether it's you first memorize a line, then you start doing it and practicing. I think this is powerful. Do you want to share a little bit more detail on
Yeah,
that?
because if someone says to you, I haven't been feeling well,
Yeah,
or, things are really, really chaotic and stressful,
yeah.
it sounds like you have a lot going on.
Ooh, that's
Tell
good.
me more about that. It sounds like you're someone who puts other people's needs before your own. Tell me more about that.
Ooh, that's good.
Right?
Yeah.
Women, especially, right, to be honest, are more motherly nurturer people. So they will put everyone else's needs in front. So give them the certainty that you are acknowledging that part and give them the significance that says, wow, you seem like someone who really tries hard to make people smile. Tell me, how much effort does that take from you? When
Oh,
they'll and then just stop talking and let them talk and then repeat back something else, right? And keep doing that to them. For them is to say, it sounds like, wow, you've been sleeping a lot less. Do you feel like 4 hours of sleep is enough? Oh
wow.
no, I'm sleeping 4.5. Oh, okay, still a problem. 4.5, did you know, can actually have some challenges. Have you ever been taught this?
Yeah.
And when he or she says, "Well, no, I'm gonna sleep when I'm dead," yeah, that's the truth. It's gonna be quicker than you think, but you can have some fun with it, right? But the thing is what does that mean for you? Give them the acknowledgement and say, and if you get into a spot where people are stuck, say, I want to tell you about a story about my friend Jill. You see, Jill was actually found out this, this, and this, and this, and she actually thought 4.25 hours was enough and found out that this wasn't the way because this happened and this happened. Now, and then stop, let them reflect. And then again, then keep giving feedback. But you want to seed something that makes them feel safe that they're not the only one. You know how they feel. Others have felt the same way. And here's what you found. And you keep asking those questions. And you say, so if you wanted to have a different outcome than you do now, what's one or two things you think you could do? Let them answer it. They know their body and they know it. It's closing the knowing and doing gap, right? And
Yes.
so what we're doing is then we're getting them to admit it. And then even if you ask somebody, could you grab a piece of paper and write down these three things? And they could actually write down what they're going to do and say, so I have a question. If I was to coach you or follow up with you, would you commit to those doing one of those three things
Wow.
and just telling me how it worked? Yeah, I could do that. Perfect. Because I'd like to actually see if that could actually work by sleeping for 7 hours, if it could change the gout that you have, or change the way you feel about yourself when you look in the mirror, right? I'd just like to know, because I
Wow.
bet you it might be different. And they're going to laugh and say, yeah, you know what? I bet you're right. And then they give you the buy and say, yeah, I could probably do that.
Yeah.
Have some accountability to it.
Oh, Troy, it's so fun to listen to you. I can see why you're such an expert and master because you are so good at engaging and really even just listening. I'm just completely just listening to you, and I'm so I feel like, oh, you're able to see people, you're able to reply back to what you've just heard. You are a master. It's so fun
Well,
to
I
listen to
appreciate it.
you
When it's
talk through
me,
that.
but the truth is, it's
Yeah.
it's because of my
Uh,
story, my journey, my struggles, my wins
yeah.
that I can put this into place to tell you
Yeah.
what worked for me,
Yeah.
what caused my ego and my stubbornness, right? Bob
Mhm.
Proctor told me, Troy, you are one stubborn guy, right? And but and I had to
Oh,
listen to that and understand what am I being stubborn about?
oh, yeah.
Where is
Yeah.
my ego coming through?
Uh-huh.
So really all I'm doing is communicating in a way that I feel you'd have to say to me to do the
Oh,
same thing.
it's really beautiful though to watch. I'm sure everybody listening is agreeing because it's just it's so rare because so many of us think about what's the next thing we want to say instead of really being present. Maybe that's kind of how we'll wrap this up is what do you think are the keys to being a good listener? Because this is where it's at, right? And so often our ego, including my own, gets in the way and we want to say something or whatever, but how do we become a better listener?
I use my hands. So what I do
Yeah.
is I'll make a statement and I start off by squeezing my thumb and my finger together. It's just a thing.
Uh-huh.
It means be quiet,
Oh. A
right? So if I
reminder.
said to you, Dr. Jill, it seems like you're having a wonderful day today. You look absolutely amazing, and I stop. And then you say, well, actually, Troy, I've been tired. Okay, tell me more. Now I've asked you one question. And I say, who did that affect? And then I'm asking too,
Oh,
right? How long has this been going on? What do you
wow.
think's been contributing? I go 9 layers deep. So once I get my hand opened up with all my fingers, then I've asked you so much and I've gotten the opportunity for you to share. I might only say 5 words. You get off the call with me, or if we were at your office and you're like, wow, that was the best conversation in the world. And yet I didn't say anything
Uh-huh.
because you need to
Oh,
be heard.
yeah.
And then you come back as a summary and you say, so if I heard you right, Jill,
Yeah.
here's what you've been saying. And it
Mhm.
sounds like it's been affecting a few other people. What are some options that you think that we could change that outcome? And I think, if I could give everybody a little bit of homework, when is the last time you asked your spouse or your kids or your friends a goal that they want to go after in life? Something that would really, be really cool and shattering, and something they don't know they could do or they think they could do, something that's like totally crazy, right? And when you're asking each other about these things, just go ask 4 or 5 people tonight something about what they want to do, something that they feel like they've always wanted to share, and just start paying attention and just be quiet. Would you like to do? What's something you'd love to share with the world? What's
Mm.
something that you feel holds you back from achieving that goal,
Oh, good.
right?
Good.
You
And
start to
then,
find out that it might be a mental block that's
mhm,
BS. It
yeah.
might be a physical block that's real. At the end of the day, why are you doing it? So it's something you've either made up in your head or that's there because your body's telling you something different, or it's intuition or what have you. Or maybe you've just been practicing some real limitations that are because of a health thing. But go ask everybody, would you love to achieve by the end of this year?
Oh, I love that. Love that ending with a super practical. And my thought as you're talking is this could be to your children, this could be to your spouse, this could be to your parents. Because so often, I love that because it's opening their mind to what else is possible. And
Yes.
then being that cheerleader for them to say, well, why couldn't you? And you might
Ladies,
even,
ladies, ask yourself first,
oh,
what
good.
is it you want to achieve? Make
Good.
sure it's about you too, so that when someone says, well, Jill, you've asked me and it's so cool. I'd like to learn how to go skydiving,
Yeah.
but what about you?
Yeah.
Right? And then have that answer ready and be committed. Write down the date that you're going to do that.
Oh, I
And if you
love
have
that.
challenges along the way, go find someone to share your story with. Find the right doctor. Find the right friend. Find those people, right? I'm grateful because I got to meet Dr. Jill and she listened to my story, and now I get to do more things because of what she listened to. And so go listen to people. Go ask questions.
Love it. I could listen to you all day long, Troy. You are just a joy and a treat, and your genuine authenticity and love for people is just shines through so clearly. I know someone earlier commented about just listening, and I know, yeah. Let's see who was it here? I love Suzanne. Thank you for sharing because you said such a sweet thing there about listening to us talk for this hour. Um, so in ending, go tell your story. What do you next want to do in your life? Find some cheerleaders, people in your life who lift you up and can make that happen. And you can start small. You can start with, it made me think when you asked that question, Troy, is I just went back to 2012 or 13, 2013. And I was writing in my journal. I was taking a time of kind of prayer and meditation, and I was thinking about writing a book. I kind of felt like a divine guidance, like you need to write your story. This was my original story, guidance. And I argued with God. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't write a story. I love it, blah, 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 right? I just like all these excuses. And I almost heard it almost as if it was audible. It was like, all you have to do is tell your story. You don't have to publish. You don't have to get the marketing. All you have to do, I'll take care of all the rest. All you have to do is write your story. And I remember so well that moment. It made it so simple because I was like, oh, I can tell, I'm the only one who can tell my story, right? I can do that. That little part, that's my part. And that's your part listening. You can tell your story. The rest, the platform, the who, the why, the how, the person you meet in the market, your family member, whatever it is, whoever you're supposed to tell it to, that will come and it'll be clear. But all you have to do is share your experience and what you learned through that and the emotion behind it. And that's how you're going to connect with people. And that's actually part of our healing. It is part of our healing to share our stories. So I hope you guys, this was helpful for you today. Troy, any last parting words of wisdom or maybe a assignment for the group?
Make sure that your story isn't fake. So
Good.
many people fake their story. Most speakers, aren't always true to when they come off the stage. Share your story, be who you are, be proud of it, and look at that story every day. and just have fun with it and celebrate other people's stories. And you know what? Go and grab a coffee party tomorrow and share, have a story thing, about challenge each other to be a part of that. And it's going to be you first that's going to share your story to give people permission that it can be a raw and open place.
Ah,
Don't fake it for anyone. And what'll happen is you'll sort out the friends and the people in your community that either are with you or as a supporter or with you because they're just there. And you'll sort those scenarios out.
amazing. Great advice. Troy, you are just a gem and such a treat to talk to and such an honor.
No,
If
I
you want to
appreciate
find
you.
out more about you or where can people find you? Is there anything
Well,
you
I
want to
put in there,
share
you
about
could
what
just
you?
send me an email, coach at Troy Aberle here. Maybe I didn't go out to everybody
Oh, did, yeah. Oh,
and I put
let's
it,
make sure. I think it did. I'm going to pull that and make sure that you guys watching, wherever you're at, it's going to everyone. There it is. There's your email.
yeah, coach at TroyAberle.com. And then, yeah, I'd love to
Okay.
talk to anybody, but I want to make sure that if you're talking to me though, you have to have watched the film first
Oh,
because it,
thank you.
if you don't understand where Jill's coming from and all the things that her story, then you're shorting yourself. So do that so that you make sure and make sure you share with everybody the link for that video because and then challenge people. What is it you want to achieve? What are things that you wish that your doctor or people
Yeah.
would have heard more?
And
Even if it's
use
all about
use the
marriage.
movie if you want to use it to start conversations. You could do a watch party. You could share it with a friend and then say, "Let's talk about this," because there are a lot of themes there, and I did that intentionally. Last little bit, a little teaser. I'll just say Troy and I are working on some really amazing content and information, especially if you're out there and you're a physician. We want to really target physicians and give you the platform to share your own story and to really impact patients on a deeper level, and also just practical business also for the patients. So stay tuned. If you got on this webinar, you clearly were on my email or saw my Instagram or something. So stay tuned because we'll share with you what's coming up. But just know we're brainstorming some really cool ideas to share with the world in the next several months. So stay tuned. Thank you, everybody who joined. I hope it was helpful and encouraging, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.